20,000 people. That's how many human beings were in Gateway Church in Southlake, Texas on any Sunday morning. 20,000 people who drove their families in from the suburbs, who dressed their children in their best clothes, who placed folded checks into offering baskets, trusting that what was happening on that stage was sacred. What they did not know, what they could not imagine, was that the man at the front of that room had been carrying a secret since 1982, a 12-year-old girl's secret. Her name is Cindy Clemeshear, and in October 2025, she stood in a courtroom in Oklahoma and said these words: "There is no such thing as consent from a 12-year-old." Robert Morris is only one name on a list that should not exist. Because in the world of faith, in the world of prayer and healing and divine calling, there has always been a shadow, a hidden architecture of wealth, of power, of silence, and of cover-up that protects men who wear God's name like a bulletproof vest. Tonight, we are going to ask the only question that matters. What does it take, not just for one man to fall, but for an entire institution to protect him while he does it? Because in every single case on this list, the man did not act alone. 10 men, 10 empires, one pattern, and we are going to go through every single one, starting with number 10. Case number 10, Carl Lentz, Hillsong, NYC, USA. The celebrity pastor who couldn't outrun his own mirror. When the cameras go off, who are you? What does it mean when the pastor is more famous than the sermon? Let us begin in New York City. Not in a traditional church. There is no wooden pew here, no stained glass, no whispered prayer in a quiet room. This is Irving Plaza, a concert venue on East 15th Street, packed with young professionals, celebrities, and people who believe that this man on stage might be the most authentic Christian they have ever seen. His name is Carl Lentz. He's 31 years old, tattooed, wearing a fitted V-neck, and he's the lead pastor of Hillsong, NYC. He's also, by 2016, one of the most photographed ministers in the world, not because of his theology, because of his zip code, because of his congregation list. Justin Bieber calls him a spiritual father. Selena Gomez, Chris Pratt, the Kardashians, they are all in his orbit. The magazine profiles call him the future of American Christianity, the pastor for a generation that stopped going to church, the man who made faith cool. And then, November 4th, 2020, Hillsong Church released a statement. Carl Lentz had been removed from his position as lead pastor. Leadership issues and breaches of trust, plus a recent revelation of moral failures. That's the language churches use when they don't want to say what actually happened. The next day, Lentz posted on Instagram. He admitted he had been unfaithful to his wife, a 5-month affair with a New York City designer named Ranin Karim. But that was just the door. Behind that door was a room, and in that room was Leona Kims. Leona Kims was the Lentz family's nanny. She and her husband Josh served as pastors at Hillsong, Boston, their entire professional life bound to the church, and therefore bound to Carl Lentz. In a sworn statement that would later be included in an internal Hillsong investigation, she alleged that Carl Lentz had sexually abused her, that the power differential was so severe he was her boss, her spiritual leader, the man who controlled her livelihood and her husband's, that the word consensual did not apply. Lentz denied those allegations. He has never been criminally charged. But here's what the internal investigation did confirm: that Lentz had manipulated former staff and volunteers so severely that multiple individuals suffered mental illness as a direct result. Where does Carl Lentz go from here, and why does it matter? Lentz did not disappear. That's the most important thing to understand. Because in the world of American megachurch Christianity, falling from grace is not the end of the story. It is too often the beginning of a brand new chapter. In March 2023, 2.5 years after his firing, Lentz quietly joined the Transformation Church in Tulsa, Oklahoma. The church led by Pastor Michael Todd, the same Michael Todd we will return to later in this video. Not as a pastor, he was careful to say that. A strategist, according to statements at the time. Not preaching, not leading, just consulting. Critics noted the gap between what was said and what the proximity implied. And then came the podcast. In June 2024, Lentz launched Lights On with Carl Lentz. The promotional language was careful. I'm not back. That guy is gone. But the architecture of a comeback, the branding, the production, the platform, was unmistakably in motion. In early 2025, Lentz appeared on Lecrae's Deep End podcast and said something that became widely quoted in religious accountability circles. He was asked about fallen pastors returning to ministry too quickly. If you have a scandal or disaster and you want to come back into ministry role anywhere close to the same time frame, I would ask you to reconsider. It was, by most readings, at least partially directed at himself. As of February 2026, confirmed just weeks before this video was produced, Carl and Laura Lentz have announced a joint book titled Around Overcoming Infidelity. Publisher, Simon & Schuster. Release, Spring 2026. We have found that the worst chapter of your life doesn't have to be the defining one, the couple stated. Former staff who signed NDAs under his leadership have not yet publicly spoken. The question this case leaves us with is not whether Carl Lentz is a changed man. That's between him and God, and between him and Leona Kims, to whom he has never issued a public apology. The question is structural. The question is, why does the institution keep producing men like him and then keep giving them second acts? Because Carl Lentz did not build that culture alone. Hillsong built it, and the man who built Hillsong is case number 9. If Carl Lentz was the product, then Brian Houston was the factory.
Case 9. Brian Houston, Hillsong Church, Australia and Global. The man who built God's empire and what he buried inside it. Chapter loop opens. What does a father know? Brian Houston was acquitted, but why won't the questions go away? To understand the full weight of what Hillsong became and what it concealed, you must first understand what it started as. Brian Houston founded Hills Christian Life Center in Sydney, Australia in 1983. He was 28 years old. His father, Frank Houston, was a revered figure in Australian Pentecostalism, a man whose name opened doors that other men spent decades trying to unlock. What Brian Houston did not know, or what the courts would later examine whether he had known, was that his father, Frank Houston, had been sexually abusing children for decades. A man named Brett Sengstock was one of those children. He was 7 years old when Frank Houston first abused him in the 1970s. He was abused repeatedly. In 1999, Brian Houston was informed of the allegations. He did not go to police. The New South Wales Police charged Brian Houston in 2021 with concealing a serious indictable offense. The prosecution argued that the failure to report his father's crimes to police was a violation of Australian law. The defense argued that Houston believed the victim, Brett Sengstock, did not want the matter reported to police. In August 2023, Sydney Magistrate Gareth Christodoulou acquitted Brian Houston. He accepted the defense's argument. Houston had, in the legal standard, a reasonable excuse: not guilty.
Here is where this case becomes genuinely complicated, and where we must be careful to separate the legal from the moral. Brian Houston was found not guilty of a criminal charge. That is real. That is the verdict. We reported accurately. But not guilty of concealment and made the right decision are not the same sentence. Because while Brian Houston was building one of the most globally influential Christian empires in human history, Hillsong music alone has been sung in more churches worldwide than perhaps any other contemporary worship catalog. His father's victims were living with what had been done to them. And then came the women. In 2022, an internal Hillsong investigation confirmed that Brian Houston had spent time alone in a hotel room with a woman who was not his wife, following the consumption of alcohol and anti-anxiety medication. A second woman came forward with a separate complaint about Houston's conduct. Hillsong's board placed him on a disciplinary sabbatical. Houston resigned as global senior pastor in March 2022. Then came the DUI. 4 months before his criminal acquittal in Australia, Brian Houston pled guilty in California to driving under the influence of alcohol following a February 2022 arrest. He received 3 years probation, fines, and was ordered to complete an alcohol program. And while all of this unfolded, the documentaries arrived. Hillsong, a Megachurch Exposed, streaming on Hulu. The Secrets of Hillsong on FX. Former members, former staff, internal investigators, they all spoke. The financial misconduct among former top leaders included, according to the FX documentary, a $150,000 retreat in Cancun and $16,000 spent on custom skateboards from church funds. Hillsong's global attendance, which once topped 100,000 across 27 nations, began to decline. Multiple campuses disaffiliated. Giving collapsed. In November 2023, Brian Houston announced on X, formerly Twitter, "Bobby and I are starting a weekly online ministry and church in 2024. I'm excited about building this new community." JesusFollowers.tv launched on July 28, 2024. In the launch video, Houston glossed over the last 2 years with a single sentence. "When we finished our time at Hillsong, it was obviously the end of a big season." He then asked for donations. "Frankly, we're starting with nothing, and we've got desperate needs," Houston told viewers. Former members noted that the last thing Brian Houston had publicly said about the women who had made complaints against him was that he had been betrayed and lied about. The accountability conversations that many abuse advocates believe are necessary for genuine restoration in ministry have not taken place as of March 2026 in any publicly documented form. Brian Houston built an empire, and inside that empire, accountability was always internal, always controlled, always managed from the top down. The question is not whether he can make a comeback. The question, the same question that haunts every case in this video, is why the architecture of these institutions make accountability nearly impossible without external force. That external force, as we will see, sometimes arrives through governments, sometimes through former members, and sometimes through journalists in a country that no one expected to be watching. From Sydney to Singapore, a different continent, but the same equation. What happens when a pastor treats the offering plate like a personal investment fund?
Case 8. Kong Hee, City Harvest Church, Singapore. The $50 million pop star plan and the trial that took 15 years. Can you launder God's money?
He stole $50 million from his own congregation, not for himself, for his wife's music career. The question is, does the reason matter? There is a concept in financial crime called sham bonds. It sounds complicated. It isn't. A sham bond is a loan that was never meant to be repaid, a financial instrument dressed up in legal language, circulated through the accounts of an organization, designed to conceal where the money actually went. Kang Hee knew about sham bonds. He knew because prosecutors would later argue he created them. Kang Hee founded City Harvest Church in Singapore in 1989 with his wife, Ho Yo Sun, known professionally as Sun Ho, a Mandarin pop singer. The church grew into one of the largest congregations in Asia, drawing tens of thousands of members and processing hundreds of millions of dollars in donations across its lifetime. The vision was simple, as Kang Hee described it: reach the world for Christ through the arts, through entertainment, through cultural influence. The execution was something else. Between approximately 2007 and 2010, approximately 50 million Singapore dollars, at the time equivalent to roughly 35 million US dollars, were transferred from City Harvest Church's building fund through a series of transactions designed to look like investments. They were not investments. The money went ultimately to fund Sun Ho's attempt to break into the American pop music market. The crossover project, as it was called internally, was Kang Hee's vision of using his wife's secular celebrity to spread the gospel. Congregation members were not told. They believed their donations were going toward a church building. The criminal proceedings began in 2012. By 2023, 11 years later, the final legal chapter of Kang Hee's case had only just closed. The trial itself, the appeals, the resentencing hearings, and the final sentences drawn out across more than a decade of Singapore's court system. Kang Hee was convicted of criminal breach of trust. He received a sentence of 3.5 years in prison. He served his time. He was released. But the story did not end there. Because City Harvest Church, an institution that had been built on trust, had to figure out what it was now. As of early 2026, City Harvest Church remains under strict government financial monitoring by Singapore's Commissioner of Charities. The church has been through multiple governance reviews. Former members who lost significant sums of money donated in good faith have pursued civil proceedings for restitution, and Kang Hee's attempts to rehabilitate his public image, including limited re-engagement with ministry, have been met with what can only be described as institutional suspicion. Singapore does not forget easily. Here is what you need to understand about City Harvest Church and about almost every institution in this video. The prosperity gospel is not just a theology, it is a fundraising mechanism. When a preacher tells a congregation that financial giving is a spiritual act, that sowing a seed guarantees a harvest, that God returns donations tenfold, they are not simply preaching. They are creating a psychological environment in which rational financial skepticism feels like a failure of faith. Kang Hee did not simply steal $50 million from his congregation. He stole it from people who had been taught that questioning their leaders was the same as questioning God. That is the architecture. That is the design. And it appears in various forms in almost every case on this list. Kang Hee is out of prison. City Harvest Church still exists, smaller, watched, supervised, but the money is gone, and the people who gave it in faith, in trust, in genuine hope, never got it back. Singapore had a government strong enough and independent enough to prosecute. But what happens in a country where the institution has deeper roots than the oversight? We go to Nigeria and to London to find out.
Pastor Chris Oyakhilome, Christ Embassy, UK, Nigeria. The Charity Commission, the private jets, and the money that vanished. What is a church, and who is watching the answer? In the United Kingdom, churches are registered charities. That means they have an obligation to account for every pound. So what happens when they don't? Pastor Chris Oyakhilome has built one of the most globally distributed Christian organizations in the world. Christ Embassy, also known as Believers Love World Incorporated, operates churches, television networks, and ministry schools on 5 continents. Love World TV is one of the most watched Christian broadcasting networks on the African continent. Pastor Chris himself is recognizable to tens of millions of believers in Nigeria, the UK, the United States, and across the global South. He is, by any objective measurement, one of the most influential religious figures alive. He is also a man whose United Kingdom branch of Christ Embassy has spent years under scrutiny that no amount of testimony or prayer has managed to fully resolve. The United Kingdom requires all religious organizations operating as charities, benefiting from tax-exempt status and the trust of the public, to file transparent accounts, maintain independent oversight, and demonstrate that funds are used for charitable purposes. Christ Embassy UK was registered as a charity. It received donations, millions of them. The UK Charity Commission opened its statutory inquiry into Christ Embassy in 2015. The findings, published over subsequent years, documented serious concerns, insufficient financial controls, inadequate record-keeping, governance failures, and funds whose ultimate destination was not adequately accounted for. In 2025 and early 2026, new reporting surfaced regarding the seizure of millions in UK church assets connected to tax irregularities, a development that has deepened the regulatory headache for Christ Embassy's UK operations, and added another layer of scrutiny to an organization that has long insisted it is being persecuted for its faith. Pastor Chris Oyakhilome's response to this sustained regulatory pressure has been consistent. He is a target. The investigations are spiritual attacks on a ministry that threatens the powers of this world. His followers agree. Inside Christ Embassy, the Charity Commission is not a regulator. It is a spiritual adversary. That framing is psychologically powerful, and it is strategically useful. Because when accountability is reframed as persecution, compliance becomes apostasy. When your followers believe that cooperating with investigators is surrendering to the devil, the investigator's job becomes nearly impossible. Beyond the UK, Oyakhilome's financial footprint is enormous and difficult to map precisely because of the deliberately distributed nature of Christ Embassy's corporate structure. The ministry's global operations include television networks, publishing companies, real estate holdings, conference revenue, and the Healing School, a ministry that claims miraculous healings and charges significant fees for attendance. Public interest journalists and former members have, over years, documented a lifestyle that includes private air travel, luxury properties, and the kind of personal financial scale that is difficult to reconcile with the stated charitable purpose of a church. Pastor Chris has not been convicted of any crime, but the UK Charity Commission's sustained, ongoing intervention, years of interim management, millions in assets frozen or seized, is not nothing. It is, by any legal or institutional standard, one of the most significant and prolonged regulatory actions ever taken against a Christian organization in the English-speaking world. The Charity Commission exists because governments recognized long ago that institutions claiming divine mandate are not automatically honest with money. The oversight exists for a reason. And what the Christ Embassy case teaches us, what it adds to the architecture we are building with every case in this video, is that the cover doesn't always come from inside the church. Sometimes it comes from the tax code.
from London to Dallas, and from the regulatory to the spectacular. Case number 6 involves a man who was personally named in the biggest celebrity criminal prosecution of the decade. He did not commit a crime, but the question of what he knew and what he chose to do with it has not gone away.
Case number 6. Bishop T.D. Jakes, The Potter's House, USA. The Diddy orbit. What the lawsuit said, what the deepfakes obscured, and what remains unanswered. What does it cost to stand near power? His name appeared in a federal lawsuit. He was not charged, but the question that 100 million YouTube views forced into the public consciousness has not been legally answered, only legally deflected. Before we go any further in this case, we must say something clearly. Bishop T.D. Jakes has not been charged with any crime. He is not under active criminal investigation to any publicly confirmed degree. He has issued sworn affidavits denying allegations of sexual misconduct. Those affidavits stand. What we are examining in this case is not criminality. It is proximity. It is association. It is the price, the institutional and reputational price of the decisions a man makes when he chooses to stand near someone who turns out to be dangerous. And we are examining the extraordinary information war that erupted around his name. A war that tells us something important about how 2025 and 2026 have changed the landscape for every public religious figure on earth. In February 2024, a music producer named Rodney Jones, known professionally as Low Rod, filed a federal lawsuit against Sean Diddy Combs, alleging that Combs had operated a multi-year sex trafficking venture. The lawsuit was 198 pages long. On one of those pages, Bishop T.D. Jakes' name appeared. Not as a co-defendant, not as an accused party. He was referenced in a section outlining evidence Jones claimed to possess, evidence Jones alleged showing how Combs had planned to leverage his relationship with Bishop T.D. Jakes to manage and soften the public impact of the earlier Cassie Ventura lawsuit, to use Jakes' moral standing as a shield. Jakes' spokesperson denied immediately and categorically. A brief attendance at a Combs birthday event in 2022 was explained. Jakes had appeared because his sermons aired on Revolt Network, which Combs chaired at the time. He greeted the family and left. What happened next is something that deserves its own separate conversation, because in the weeks and months following the Combs case exploding into public consciousness, something unprecedented happened on YouTube. More than 26 videos appeared, some with more than 1 million views, making lurid, explicit, and entirely fabricated claims about Bishop T.D. Jakes. The thumbnails showed him in handcuffs, in a prison jumpsuit, in explicit scenarios with other men. None of it was real. A computer science professor at the University at Buffalo, Siwei Liu, an expert in deepfake detection, reviewed the audio in at least one of these videos and determined it was more than 90% likely to have been AI generated. The videos were coming from accounts with About sections listing locations in Pakistan, the Philippines, South Africa, and Kenya. They were not journalism. They were not even honest disinformation. They were, as T.D. Jakes' legal team argued in a December 2024 court motion, a monetized misinformation industry using a prominent black pastor's name as clickbait to generate ad revenue for overseas operators. Jakes' legal team filed in federal court in California to subpoena Google, YouTube's parent company, for the identifying information of 4 specific accounts. Here is where we must sit with the discomfort. T.D. Jakes did not commit the crimes that AI videos invented for him.
But the legitimate question, the one that existed before the deepfakes, before the misinformation industry turned his name into content, is not about criminality. It is about discernment. Sean Diddy was convicted in October 2025 of 2 federal counts related to sex trafficking. He received a 4-year sentence. His appeal arguments are scheduled for April 9, 2026. Combs has been shown in the most explicit public evidence to be a dangerous man. And the leaders around him, the pastors, the executives, the cultural figures who shared platforms and stages and birthday parties with him for years, must each answer the question that their congregations are quietly asking. What did you know, and when did you know it? Bishop Jakes has answered with a February 2025 sworn affidavit. The affidavit stands. The conversation, however, about the circles that powerful pastors keep and the accountability that proximity to power demands, that conversation is very much alive in 2026. From proximity to crime itself. Case number 5 is about a pastor who did not simply stand near fraud, he committed it. He used the desperation of a pandemic, the trust of his community, and the name of God to steal.
Case number 5. Pastor Abiodun Oluwasanmi, Ohio, USA. The pandemic pastor. How he turned COVID relief into a $4.2 million con. Is when stealing in the name of God still stealing? Millions of Americans were desperate for help in 2020. The government created a safety net, and at least one pastor decided that safety net was his to cut open. The year is 2020. The world has stopped. Small businesses across the United States are shuttered. Families have lost income. Employees have lost jobs. The federal government, in an unprecedented act, deploys hundreds of billions of dollars in emergency relief through the Paycheck Protection Program, the PPP. The program is designed to be fast, to reach people quickly. It trusts applications. It does not have the infrastructure in the middle of a pandemic to verify every claim with the depth it deserves. Pastor Edward Abiodun Oluwasanmi saw that. Oluwasanmi, a Nigerian-born pastor based in Ohio, operated a series of organizations, including an entity called Dayspring Property Incorporated. He had a congregation. He had a platform. He had, according to federal prosecutors, an understanding of exactly how to exploit emergency financial systems. Between 2020 and 2021, Oluwasanmi allegedly submitted fraudulent applications for COVID-19 relief funds. The applications claimed employees, payrolls, and operational costs that did not exist or were grossly misrepresented. The total alleged fraud, $4.2 million. In February 2025, the FBI arrested Oluwasanmi in Ohio. The federal indictment was detailed. The government had the records, the applications, the fund transfers, the accounts. By late 2025, Oluwasanmi had been convicted. As of March 2026, he remains in federal custody awaiting final sentencing. The assets accumulated during the fraud period, property, cash holdings, and related accounts have been seized and are in the process of federal liquidation. We need to spend a moment here because this case, more than perhaps any other on this list, exposes a specific lie at the heart of some expressions of faith-based community leadership. When a pastor builds a congregation, particularly in immigrant communities, in diaspora communities, in communities where the church is not just a spiritual home, but the social safety net, the community center, the employment network, the legal advice bureau, the trust that is extended to that pastor is total. It is not just faith-based trust, it is survival trust. And Oluwasanmi did not simply steal from the federal government, he stole from a pandemic.
He stole from the architecture of emergency that was built precisely to help the most vulnerable, including, in many cases, members of the very immigrant communities his church served. That is the kind of theft that breaks something deeper than a bank account. Oluwasanmi will be sentenced. The money is gone, and the congregation he told was being shepherded towards God was, in practice, being shepherded to his bank account. From Ohio to Nairobi, from a COVID fraud to something far darker. Case number 4 involves a pastor whose name became entangled in one of the most horrifying mass death events in modern African history, the Shakahola forest. And the question of what he knew and what he preached may never be fully answered.
Case number 4. Pastor Ezekiel Odero, New Life Prayer Center and Church, Kenya. The helipad, the cult connection, and the state that finally said enough. Chapter loop opens. What is the line between faith and complicity? When over 400 bodies were pulled from a forest in Kenya, the government began asking a simple question. How deep did this network go? The answer led them to a man with a helipad on his church roof. In April 2023, Kenyan authorities entered a stretch of forested land near Shakahola in Kilifi County, following reports of a religious group that had been starving itself to death in order to meet Jesus. By the time the excavations were complete, more than 450 bodies had been recovered. The alleged orchestrator was Paul Mackenzie, leader of a group called Good News International Ministries. His followers had, by all accounts, been told that fasting to death was the path to salvation, that the world was ending, that only those who shed their bodies would be saved. Kenya was stunned, and Kenya's government began to ask, in the ecosystem of independent, unregulated, largely unchecked religious organizations operating across this country, who else carries risk? That question brought investigators to Kilifi County and to New Life Prayer Center and Church. Pastor Ezekiel Odero is not Paul Mackenzie. He has stated repeatedly, forcefully, and through multiple legal teams that he has no connection to the Shakahola deaths and that the allegations against him are entirely fabricated by adversaries motivated by envy and political opposition. That is his position. His lawyers have argued it in multiple courts. What the Kenyan government argued was different. Odero was arrested on allegations of links to the deaths associated with the Shakahola investigation, as well as money laundering charges connected to the substantial financial infrastructure of New Life Prayer Center and Church. He was taken into custody. He was eventually released on bail. A court in January 2026 ruled that the state had failed to provide compelling reasons for continued detention. Odero walked out. He called it a vindication, but the legal battle did not end there. In August 2023, simultaneous to the Shakahola investigation, Kenya's Registrar of Societies issued a Gazette notice canceling the registration of New Life Prayer Center and Church. The stated reason: failure to file annual returns. Odero's legal team immediately challenged this. They filed appeals. They argued the process was unfair, that the church's file had been deliberately made unavailable at the registry, that the deregistration was a bad faith government action designed to destroy his ministry while his popularity was at his peak. The courts at every level disagreed. The High Court dismissed his challenge. The Court of Appeal upheld that dismissal, finding that Odero had failed to exhaust the proper administrative remedies before going to court.
As of March 2026, New Life Prayer Center and Church remains deregistered. Odero remains free. He continues to minister. His legal team continues to fight. The assets freeze, involving millions of dollars connected to the church's financial operations, remains a live legal matter. Here is what this case forces us to ask, and it is genuinely hard. Kenya is a country where religious organizations have operated for decades with minimal oversight, where charismatic pastors have built empires of influence and wealth that rival those of governments, where the line between genuine faith healing and dangerous manipulation is policed, if at all, by social pressure and not by law. The Shakahola massacre did not just kill 450 people. It gave the Kenyan state something it had never fully possessed: the political will and the public mandate to regulate religion. And Pastor Ezekiel Odero, innocent of the Shakahola connection by his account and unconvicted, became part of the first wave of that new regulatory reality. Whether justice or overreach, the state had finally arrived at the church door. From Kenya to Texas, from Kilifi to a stage in Tulsa, case number 3 is about a pastor whose fall from grace has been slower than a courtroom, but more publicly visible than almost any arrest, because every Sunday is recorded. And what was recorded in 2025 raised questions that $100,000 of independent funding was designed to answer.
Case number 3. Todd White, Lifestyle Christianity, USA. The fake healer, the $500,000 salary, and the $100,000 investigation he tried to avoid. What does it mean to fake a miracle? For 20 years, Todd White stood on stages around the world and told people he was healing them. In February 2026, a $100,000 independent investigation was offered to find out if that was true. Here is what happened next. There is a category of Christian leader that does not fit neatly into the category of pastor. Todd White is not primarily a teacher. He does not build hospitals or schools. He does not feed the poor in any documented large-scale institutional way. What Todd White does, what made him famous, what built his multi-million-dollar lifestyle Christianity empire in North Lake, Texas, is miracles. Street miracles, stage miracles, viral miracles. The leg lengthening is the most famous. White approaches strangers or willing participants at his events and appears to physically elongate one leg to match the other, instantly, supernaturally, accompanied by whooping from the crowd. The man has millions of followers, a Bible college, a conference circuit that spans multiple continents, a personal salary that, according to allegations made in early 2026, has exceeded $500,000 per year, drawn from the donations of people who believe they are supporting a genuine move of God. In early February 2026, a Bible teacher and Christian apologist named Mike Winger published a 4-hour exposé. 4 hours. Not a tweet, not a podcast clip. A 4-hour documented examination of 25 specific allegations against Todd White and lifestyle Christianity. The allegations included faking fasts and embellishing healing testimonies, receiving a salary exceeding $500,000 annually, refusing to fly below first class on any flight, including short domestic legs, refusing to take a pay cut during financial crises while other senior staff did, using personal information about staff's private lives as a manipulation tool,
and operating the ministry through non-disclosure agreements that silenced anyone who tried to speak. Winger went further. He made a financial offer. His ministry would pay up to $100,000 for a fully independent third-party investigation into lifestyle Christianity's practices, if White would simply approve it. The petition at toddwhitepetition.com collected more than 1,600 signatures, specifically from people connected to Lifestyle Christianity University, asking for the NDAs to be canceled and the investigation to proceed. On February 24, 2026, Todd White released a video. He called it an update. What you are about to see is Todd White's February 24, 2026 public statement. Watch for what is said and what is conspicuously absent. Does he name a specific action? Does he name a specific person he harmed? Does the word accountability appear as a verb or only as a noun? An image repair analyst, Dr. Julia Dahl, a clinical pathologist and abuse survivor advocate who has studied the language of apologies extensively, reviewed this video publicly with journalist Julie Roys. Her assessment was direct. A genuine apology, she noted, names the specific harm. A 10-year-old child who knocks a coffee cup off the table and breaks it does not say, "I'm sorry if the cup felt broken." They say, "I knocked the cup, I broke it, I'm sorry." White's video, which Roys and Dahl labeled a faux apology, acknowledged hurt broadly, used language about God's confirmation, promoted the ministry's upcoming outreach goals, and conspicuously did not name a single action for which he was taking responsibility. Dahl noted that the absence of specificity in a public apology when someone faces specific documented allegations is not accidental. It is in many cases legally advised. The independent investigation as of this recording in March 2026 has not been approved. The NDAs have not been canceled. 20 years of claimed miracles, a $500,000 salary, a $100,000 offer sitting on the table, and the curtain has not yet been fully pulled back. From a pastor who may have faked miracles to a pastor who built a legitimate megachurch empire and then tried to use it for things his congregation never approved. Case number 2 is about a man who turned the offering plate into a political and personal instrument and paid a price measured not in prison years, but in something he may value more.
Case number 2. Mike Todd, Transformation Church, Tulsa, USA. The viral pastor, the $100 million empire, and the audit nobody asked for until they did. When the stage becomes the product. Transformation Church in Tulsa owns more than $100 million in real estate. Its lead pastor is a New York Times best-selling author with 2 million Instagram followers. And in January 2026, theological watchdogs decided it was time to find out where all of that was really going. Michael Todd is, by almost every metric, one of the most successful communicators of his generation. He went from being a sound technician at a small Tulsa church in 2015 to becoming its lead pastor within 4 years. Under his leadership, Transformation Church exploded, from less than 300 members to tens of thousands of online and in-person attendees. His books on relationships have sold millions of copies. His social media presence is enormous. His voice is heard by more people each week than many mayors ever speak to in a career. And the church he built has money to match. Transformation Church has, between 2019 and the present, assembled a real estate portfolio in Tulsa County
That is, by any standard, extraordinary for a local megachurch. The Spirit Bank Event Center, purchased in 2019 for $10.5 million. The Post-Rock Plaza Retail Center surrounding it, purchased in 2020 for $20.5 million. Additional office buildings, adding to a 2-year total of approximately $66 million in Tulsa County real estate. A subsequent acquisition brought what Transformation Church social media called Transformation Towers, a global headquarters building whose purchase added to the portfolio. The total assessed real estate value under Transformation Church's ownership in Tulsa County, as tracked by local investigators and journalists in early 2026, is estimated at over $100 million. Before we get to the formal investigation, we need to sit with the content, because it is the content that raised the first alarm. The 2022 Spit Sermon, in which Todd spread saliva on a congregant to dramatize the biblical story of Jesus healing a blind man, went globally viral. For some, it was powerful and bold. For others, including a growing chorus of theological voices, it was a symbol of a culture that had become so focused on spectacle that the line between worship and performance had disappeared. The 2023 Ransom Easter production included elements including visual representations of Jesus and portrayals of the sacrifice that many theologians and longtime churchgoers described as crossing the boundary from art into something they found deeply troubling. The $1 million giveaways, large cash and gift distributions staged at church events and heavily promoted on social media raised questions about whether the church's financial priorities reflected a ministry model or a content strategy. In January 2026, a coalition of theological watchdogs released what they called a vision audit of Transformation Church. The audit raised specific concerns about the relationship between the church's stated charitable mission and its accumulating real estate empire, its social media-driven financial commitments, and the governance structures that supervised the pastor's considerable authority. As of March 2026, a formal independent investigation into Transformation Church's $100 million plus real estate holdings in Tulsa County has been initiated by oversight bodies, with no findings yet published. There is one additional dimension to this case that we would be negligent to ignore. It was Mike Todd who gave Carl Lentz, fired from Hillsong for moral failures in 2020, accused of spiritual and sexual abuse, a soft landing, a strategist role at Transformation Church, a path back toward influence. We noted this in case number 10. We return to it now, because in the ecosystem of American megachurch celebrity, Mike Todd's Transformation Church has functioned as something of a rehabilitation corridor, a place where fallen leaders, men who the broader Christian community has raised serious questions about, can quietly reassemble their platforms under a new banner. Whether that is compassion, as Todd's defenders argue, or whether it is a culture of insufficient accountability, as his critics contend, is a question the current investigation may eventually help to answer. Mike Todd has not been charged, he has not been convicted, he has, so far, cooperated with oversight processes. But the architecture of unchecked authority, escalating spectacle, and explosive financial accumulation without independently verified governance is a pattern, and this video has been built around showing you that pattern. Because in case number 1, we are going to see what that pattern looks like when it runs completely unchecked for 40 years. Everything in this video, every cover-up, every financial scheme, every manipulation of divine trust has been prologue, because case number 1 is about a 12-year-old girl in pink pajamas on Christmas Day in 1982, and the man who abused her, stood on a stage in front of 20,000 people for 40 more years. Case number 1. Robert Morris, Gateway Church, Southlake, Texas, USA. The Christmas day, the pink pajamas, and the 40-year silence that built an empire. Her name is Cindy Clemenshire. She was 11 years old when she first met Robert Morris. He was a 20-year-old traveling evangelist invited into her family's home in Hominy, Oklahoma, by parents who believed they were welcoming a man of God. On Christmas Day, 1982, Cindy was 12. Morris invited her to his bedroom. She was wearing pink pajamas with bloomer pants. What happened that night and what continued to happen for the next 4.5 years is what 5 counts of lewd and indecent conduct with a child are made of. And what Robert Morris built in the years that followed, one of the largest megachurches in the United States, a Trump Evangelical Advisory Board appointment, 20 years of international ministry influence, books, conferences, television broadcasts, and a congregation of 20,000 was built on the silence of a 12-year-old girl. This is not a case where the secret was perfectly hidden. In 2005, nearly 23 years after the abuse began, Cindy Clemenshire told church leaders what Morris had done to her. The response was not a report to authorities. The response was not a criminal investigation. The response was, according to subsequent testimony and reporting, that Morris was counseled, that he stepped away from ministry briefly, that he received help, and then he continued. He continued preaching. He continued building. He continued receiving honor from the evangelical world, from the political world, from the millions of people who had no idea that the woman who was 12 years old in 1982 had told church leaders what he had done and been, in the most profound institutional sense, silenced by the response. Multiple Gateway elders, it was later confirmed, knew of the allegations before they became public. A subsequent church investigation found that 4 former elders, Thomas Miller, Jeremy Carrasco, Kevin Grove, and Gayland Laushi, were aware that Clemenshire was a child when the abuse occurred. They said nothing. In June 2024, a Christian accountability publication called The Wartburg Watch published Cindy Clemenshire's testimony. She was 54 years old. She described the Christmas night in 1982. She described the years of abuse. She described the way Morris framed it, the manipulation, the grooming, the exploitation of her family's spiritual trust. And she described, decades later, telling people who were supposed to protect their congregation and watching them protect the institution instead. The following footage is from Robert Morris's public statement following the initial allegations in June 2024. Watch for the language he uses to describe what happened. He calls it an inappropriate relationship with a young lady. He does not, in this statement, use the word child. He does not, in this statement, use the word abuse. Listen for what is missing. In a statement to the Christian Post, Morris admitted to kissing and petting, framing it as something other than what it was. It was not intercourse, he said, but it was wrong. Cindy Clemenshire was 12 years old. There is no legal or moral framework in which what was done to a 12-year-old child can be described as a relationship with a young lady. Morris resigned from Gateway Church on June 18, 2024. The Oklahoma Attorney General's office, meanwhile, had already begun its work. In March 2025, a multi-county Oklahoma grand jury indicted Robert Preston Morris on 5 counts of lewd and indecent acts with a child. He initially maintained his innocence. Then, on October 2nd, 2025, in a courtroom in Osage County, Oklahoma, before Special District Judge Cindy Pickerill, Robert Morris entered the building flanked by his wife, his adult children, and their spouses. He hugged his family. He kissed his wife. And then he walked to the stand and entered 5 guilty pleas. Under the plea agreement, Morris was sentenced to 10 years in prison, with all but 6 months suspended. He would serve his 6 months in Osage County Jail, then 9.5 years of probation supervised by the state of Texas. He was ordered to pay Cindy Clemishire $270,000 in restitution. He was required to register as a sex offender for life. There is no such thing as consent from a 12-year-old, Clemishire said in her victim impact statement, looking directly at the man who had abused her when she was that child. Today, justice has finally been served. The man who manipulated, groomed, and abused me as a 12-year-old innocent girl is finally going to be behind bars.
I'm not to blame. I shouldn't have shame on me. I don't live in shame anymore.
You did not just harm me as a child. You stole my innocence, the most sacred possession a child has, and you murdered the future woman, wife, mother, grandmother, sister, daughter, and friend I was meant to become. Cindy Clemishire, October 20th, 2025. Because this was never just about one man. Gateway Church, founded in 2000, built into one of the largest congregations in North Texas, began to collapse the moment the truth became impossible to contain. Saturday services across 8 of the church's 9 campuses were suspended. Staff were laid off as tithes collapsed. A federal class action lawsuit was filed by former members alleging that Gateway had misled donors about its missions giving commitments. The defamation lawsuit filed by Clemishire, alleging that church leadership had spread false characterizations of her story to protect the institution's reputation, was ruled able to proceed by a Dallas County judge in February 2026, with a trial date set for June 15, 2026. Robert Morris, separately, is engaged in an arbitration dispute with Gateway Church over what he claims is a multi-million-dollar retirement package they owe him. Active legal proceedings as of March 2026. Criminal sentence, Robert Morris serving 6 months, Osage County Jail, 9.5 years probation. Defamation lawsuit, Clemishire versus Gateway, trial set June 15, 2026. Class action lawsuit, former members versus Gateway, federal court, ongoing. Arbitration, Robert Morris versus Gateway, multi-million-dollar dispute. Secondary sexual assault lawsuit, third-party case vis-a-vis Gateway Youth Group, proceeding. We said at the beginning of this video that the master mystery was not just about one man. What does it take for an entire institution to protect evil wearing a collar? Here is the answer that 40 years of Gateway Church provides. It takes leaders who value the reputation of the institution over the safety of a child. It takes an internal accountability process that calls itself pastoral care and functions as a cover-up. It takes a board of elders who are told a girl was 12 years old and choose to say nothing for 2 decades. It takes a culture in which the testimony of a victim is weighed against the financial and social cost of believing her and found insufficient. It takes, at the most fundamental level, a system in which the pastor is above accountability because the pastor is the accountability system. That is not a Gateway Church problem. It is an architecture, and we have seen it in different forms in every era.
10 men. One of them is in jail. One is under sustained government financial intervention. One has had his church deregistered.
2 are subjects of ongoing formal investigations. 1 pleaded guilty to federal fraud. 1 has spent 2 years in civil and criminal courts. 1 has had his legacy dismantled by documentaries he cannot unsee. 1 is selling a book about the marriage his adultery destroyed. And 1 has spent years trying to stay out of a legal fire he did not set but chose to stand near. The institutions behind them, in South Lake and Singapore, in Nairobi and New York City, in Sydney and Singapore and Tulsa, are all still standing. Some are smaller, some are watched, some are supervised, but they are standing. And the question is not what we do with these 10 men. The question is what we do with the architecture that produced them, that protected them, that gave them 20,000 people and told those people to close their eyes and trust. Cindy Clemenshire spent 40 years being told her story was smaller than Robert Morris's story. In October 2025, she proved that the opposite was true. Her story was always the real one. My hope is that many victims hear my story and it can help lift their shame and allow them to speak up. Cindy Clemenshire, October 2nd, 2025. Before we continue, I need to ask you something. Not to subscribe, although if this work matters to you, that matters to us, but actually to think. We've gone through 5 of these cases now, and in every single one, there are 2 stories, the pastor's story and the story of someone who tried to tell the truth and wasn't heard. So here is your verdict question, the one I want you to leave in the comments below. In these cases, is the problem individual bad actors, or is the problem the system that produces them and protects them? Because your answer determines everything. If it is individual bad actors, then the solution is better background checks and faster resignations. If it is the system, then the answer is something much harder. It is the entire theology of unaccountable authority, the entire culture of financial opacity inside institutions that claim divine mandate. Tell me where you land. And if you're watching this and you have been inside one of these churches, if you have a story that you've never had space to tell, the comments are open, and so are our social handles in the description below. Because Cindy Clemenshire was told 40 years that her story was smaller than Robert Morris's story. She was wrong. She was always wrong. And so is anyone who tells you the same thing.